I got Keith Idec on the line with Boxingscene.com. Keith, how are you?
Hey Ness, how you doing?
I am good. I appreciate your time as always. I want to get right
No problem.
into, I guess, one of your biggest reports because we need clarity to understand the pay-per-views. Most recently, I seen you tweet out something about how Al Heyman renegotiated the provider percentage that I guess he has to break them off with every time there's a pay-per-view. Boxing fans long have been under the impression that promoters have to give 50, sometimes 40% to the provider, but most recently you had some new information. Can you just educate us?
Yeah, it's closer to 40%. The standard in the industry for a long time was a 50-50% split between the promoter and the promoter and the distributor, and then the cable and satellite operators, which are the traditional forms of the way people consume pay-per-view events. That has changed a lot now. I mean, he renegotiated this. This was not recently. This was probably about, if I'm remembering it correctly, about 2 years ago, maybe a little longer ago than that. So he gets, I don't know I don't have the contracts obviously, but it's closer to 40% now than 50%, which is a substantial amount of money when you're dealing with fights that do 500,000 buys, 600,000, and in this case, they believe it will get to 800,000 buys. So it turns into a lot of money, of course. And then, the promoter is splitting with the distributor as well on their side of it. The distributor, in this case, Showtime, generally gets somewhere between 8 and 10%. And they absorb some of the risk, but usually less risk than the promoter. So that's where it's, and the other thing to factor in too, Ness, is that digital sales account for a lot of sales these days. They don't tell us exactly how many, but it seems to be, they're protective of that information, but it seems that with each passing event, more of the sales are consumed, are bought digitally than before. And it's just becoming a way more that people consume fights now, either on their computers, their laptops, their phones even. People are out on Saturday nights and they might get the fight on a phone. Not an ideal way to watch it, of course, because the phone screens are so small, but people are doing it in mass now. So it does account for a bigger percentage, and they keep much more than 60% of those sales, because if you're, now there are other ways to buy it digitally than Showtime's website, but a lot of people do buy it, in this case, directly from Showtime's website, in other cases from Fox's website. And of course, the ESPN Top Rank model is completely different because you're buying it almost exclusively through the ESPN Plus platform. You still can buy it through traditional platforms, but a lot of it is bought through the ESPN Plus avenue, vehicle, however you want to explain it.
Now, Bob is being, I would say, optimistic, especially since you've reported that Canelo is tracking to do about 800 or above thousand pay-per-view buys. Bob is suggesting Porter Crawford can do anywhere between 500,000 and 1.5 million. Do you have any educated guess for us?
Well, Bob says a lot of things, as we well know, Ness, so I wouldn't put too much stock in the 1.5 million number. Bob's a promoter. He's supposed to say things that grab attention and are optimistic, cautiously optimistic sometimes. I don't think the fight will get anywhere near 1.5 million buys. It's an excellent fight. It's obviously the most difficult challenge on paper, at least for Terence Crawford, since he moved up to the welterweight division 3 years ago. I just don't think that commercially it will do as well. I don't even think as the Canelo Plant fight, just because Canelo is such a transcendent star. He's obviously the biggest star in American boxing and has an enormous Mexican fan base, which obviously helps him sell a lot of pay-per-views. And Terence Crawford, while a lot of people still argue the best pound-for-pound fighter in the world, although Canelo seems to have taken his spot, he's certainly one of the 3 best pound-for-pound fighters in boxing. And Sean Porter is a proven, well-known welterweight. I think they'll do very good business together. I think somewhere between 500,000 and 600,000 buys is a somewhat realistic number, but the thing, Ness, as you well know, and you guys talk about this all the time, people find ways to steal the signal. So, they're stealing money from the fighters and their families when they do that, but people are just going to do that. If you can figure out a way to watch the fight for free and you don't want to pay $70 in this case, or in some cases $80, and I do understand that when you ask people to go into their pocket seemingly every other week here in this stretch that we have, they're just not going to do it. And if they can find ways to steal the signal, they're going to do it. So it's really on the promoters and the television networks and the distributors to figure out a way to better police it so they make more money. But it really does cut into the actual buy rates. I mean, I think many more people than 500,000 will see the Crawford-Porter fight, but not necessarily buy it.
Do you think that Plant is a stronger B-side than Porter, or was the slap just heard and seen around the world, picked up by a lot of commercial media, which made the Plant-Canelo fight as big as it turned out to be?
I don't think that it hurt. There was a lot of publicity, negative publicity, of course, but they say all publicity is good publicity, right? So it did help build up toward the fight, the skirmish or whatever you want to call it that happened at the press conference. It obviously grabbed a lot of headlines and drew a lot of attention. But I think the buy rate more relates to how big of a star Canelo is. I don't think Plant was necessarily a weak B-side. Now, he's not as established or well-known as Sean Porter, who not only has fought everyone in the welterweight division, but is a prominent broadcaster on a broadcast network in the United States. So he's very well-known, Sean Porter, and of course he's an excellent, excellent fighter with a proven track record. But I would say this about Plant. Look, people try to dispute the numbers and everything, but when Caleb Plant fought on Fox, and he fought in main events on Fox, he drew higher viewership consistently. It's happened multiple times, particularly in his fight against Caleb Truax, which was considered pretty much an easy fight at that point in Caleb Truax's career because, Plant was much younger and an excellent boxer, and Caleb Truax was 37 or 38 years old. That was not viewed as a competitive fight going into it, yet that fight peaked at 2.1 million viewers, and that's substantially more than most of Fox's main events. So there is probably something to be said for Caleb Plant having a little bit more of a fan base than people are willing to recognize.
Before I move on from him, I just want to get, what is your most educated guess on what Plant does next? And do you know anything of these alleged rumors? The internet wants to have us believe he has a broken orbital bone as well.
Well, he has denied that publicly, so I don't have any inside information, Ness. I just, people have said that he has a fractured orbital bone. Based on the way his face looked when he left the ring, that would not surprise me at all, but he has denied it. Either way, he's not going to fight that was a very rough fight. He takes his first loss. It was a physically grueling fight. So I wouldn't expect him to fight for 9 months or so anyway. I don't expect him to come back until at the absolute earliest, sometime in the summer. So even if he has a slightly fractured orbital bone, which is, of course, a serious injury, if it doesn't need surgery, he probably wouldn't fight until the summer, early fall anyway. And I think he'd be on that schedule regardless of whether he has that injury or not.
So Clarissa signed a 7-figure deal with Boxer, but how do us Americans get to watch her fight? They're setting up this, I don't want to call it a tune-up, but an in-between fight while she gets to Savannah Marshall. But do we get to see this fight? Have you heard anything from Salida or Showtime? Is anyone picking up this fight?
I've spoken to Dimitri about this recently. I think it was Thursday or Friday. And they're looking for a broadcast partner in the U.S. They weren't at the point where they had made a deal or close to making a deal. If I had to guess, it will probably be on Fight TV or something like that. That's my educated guess on it. But and for a reasonable price, I would think. I don't think it would be like a $30 pay-per-view or anything like that. I think they'd have to be more reasonable about it because Savannah Marshall and Claressa Shields are basically in fights that they're heavily favored to win, and it's obviously set up for them to fight in the spring sometime. So there is interest in that. I think it's one of the bigger fights in women's boxing that you could make, not necessarily, in my opinion, as big as Amanda Serrano and Katie Taylor, which also could come off in April. But it's a big fight in women's boxing, and of course is a real test for Claressa Shields and her opportunity to avenge her only loss in a boxing ring as an amateur or professional. So there's a real storyline there. Now, she just lost in MMA, but I don't really hold that against her in any way. She doesn't even know how, I mean, she barely knows how to fight in MMA. So I just commend her for taking that leap and trying to do something really incredible. And it just really showed when she lost a couple of weeks ago that she really is a genuine novice in MMA. So again, I don't really hold that against her all that much. I know some people enjoyed seeing Claressa lose because she's a very polarizing person and she's not shy about expressing her opinions. But I think more so, if you take a step back from all of that, you'd have to really commend her for even trying to fight in MMA. I mean, it's not, and she's doing it simultaneous to training for boxing. She's going from boxing to MMA, from boxing to MMA. It's pretty incredible what she's trying to do. And of course, she's being paid handsomely for the trouble to fight in MMA, but it's really remarkable what she's doing. I think she deserves a lot of credit for that.
And Keith, how realistic are these Andy Ruiz, Wilder, I guess, internet rumors again? Because we know Andy's called out Wilder, but is it realistic for PBC to do Wilder Ruiz immediately after Wilder's very tough 3 fights with Fury, or are you expecting him to be out even longer than the plan?
Yeah, I don't see any way that Andy Ruiz is fighting Deontay Wilder next. I wouldn't expect Deontay Wilder to fight anytime soon. He took a beating in his last fight. He's going to need some time physically to rest. He's made an enormous amount of money in his last few fights. He doesn't really need to come back quickly, and he's going to have to, from a psychological standpoint, really try to deal with this loss because, look, he doesn't have any excuses this time. He had a lot of excuses after the second loss about everything that happened. Tyson Fury emphatically knocked him out in their third fight, so he's going to have to overcome the psychological hurdle of that first defeat and not having any excuse for it before he comes back. When he does come back, I would expect him to fight a lesser opponent, I guess is the best way to put it, than Andy Ruiz, and I would expect Andy Ruiz, the opponents that I have heard that are more realistic for Andy Ruiz as opposed to Deontay Wilder are Luis Ortiz, which is an intriguing fight, though not really all that sellable on pay-per-view, and it would have to be a pay-per-view fight based on the purses that they would demand, or Andy Ruiz against Charles Martin, which is, of course, a lesser fight commercially even than the Ortiz fight, but is an interesting fight. Those are the 2 guys that I would expect Andy Ruiz. Either of those 2 guys are the ones that I would expect Andy Ruiz to fight next, not Deontay Wilder.
Well, and have you heard anything of our mutual friend here, Keith? What seems like no time, Thurman. I texted him the other day because I seen Castillo Clayton from Canada was in Las Vegas, and I was just wishfully hoping he was mentioning that he was getting ready for a fight for a possible Thurman, but Thurman denied that. Have you heard anything for Thurman? And I mean, should we just stop thinking about him? I mean, it's really going way over 2.5 years, right? Are we at 2.5 now?
We're getting there. We're getting close to 2.5 years. And I said, look, I understand Keith Thurman's enjoying the fruits of his labor. He has put a price tag on what he feels he is worth. That price tag is higher than people are willing to pay at this point. The days of Keith Thurman getting what he once upon a time called get-back fights and things, that's over with because no one cares anymore. I mean, look, he already lost, and it was a close competitive fight against Manny Pacquiao, but he's not an undefeated world champion anymore. He's in no position to demand making millions of dollars for tune-up fights. So he's going to have to come back to earth to some degree on his asking prices. And if he does that, maybe because I'll tell you what, if he fights Castillo Clayton coming off nearly a 3-year layoff, that will not be an easy fight. So we know what happened the last time that Keith Thurman took a fight that people thought was going to be easy for him against Josecito Lopez. He almost got knocked out. So I'd be real careful if I'm him from a matchmaking standpoint of who I fight next. But it's a tricky business dealing for Al Heyman in that you want to put him in a fight that's fair to him coming off a 2.5-year layoff, but he's had a 2.5-year layoff because he refused to fight for X amount of dollars. So what do you do there? Do you put him in a fight where he's clearly a favorite? And if you do that, how much money is he willing to accept for that type of fight? You're not going to pay Keith Thurman $1 million from someone on Jose Tito Lopez's level. It just doesn't make any sense. So you wouldn't think that that's going to happen. I think Terrence Crawford kind of put it the best way that he could put it a few weeks ago when we asked him about Keith Thurman. He said, and I was sort of surprised that he said this.
Keith, you're not talking into the mic. You're getting muffled up a little bit.
Yeah, I was sort of surprised that Terrence Crawford said this a few weeks ago when we had him in Las Vegas after the press conference. But he said that he thinks that the Keith Thurman fight for him is a bigger event commercially than the Sean Porter fight.
Yeah.
I appreciated his honesty. I just thought it was a weird thing for him to say while he was promoting the Sean Porter fight. But in saying that, Terrence Crawford also said that he doesn't know what Keith Thurman's doing. So while he thinks it's a bigger fight, he doesn't know that, let's say he beat Sean Porter on Saturday night. He doesn't know if that's a realistic opportunity for him in 2022 because he literally said, I don't know what Keith Thurman's doing. No one knows what Keith Thurman's doing. And that is true. And that's, I think, where we're at with Keith Thurman at this point.
Damn, I'm going to have to go to that gym, and I'm going to have to ask him because, like, it sounds like the best thing for him to do is take an off-TV tune-up fight since he's not being, given the luxury of an on-TV tune-up fight because he can't afford, hypothetically, to take a Castillo-Clayton fight straight off, without a tune-up, basically, in my opinion. I don't know. I could be wrong. I mean, you just said the same thing, though.
He would never take a non-TV fight, and I don't think that would even be proposed to him just because he's too big of a name in boxing to have him fighting off TV. What I think more it relates to, Ness, is that he's just going to have to be realistic with his purse demands. Like, he's made a lot of money. Al Heyman has made him a very wealthy man and helped him invest his money. He's not hurting for money. So, but if he thinks he's going to come back and fight for $2 million in a tune-up fight, that just isn't happening. So it's on him to be realistic about what he should expect for that type of fight, if that's what he wants before he moves into a more difficult fight, which is a realistic expectation on his part as well, because, again, he's been off for 2.5 years.
And so let me ask you, you said in this conversation he turned down. Who did he turn down? What have you heard?
Who turned down?
Keith, you said.
I don't know what. No, I'm just saying. I don't know specifically which opponents he's turned down, but what I am saying is he expects a certain amount of money that he's just not going to be paid. The days of giving him 7-figure tune-up fights are in effect over. So that's more what I was referring to.
Was Ellerby? I mean, I know I asked you this, but I just got to double down. Was Ellerby capping? They never made an offer to Thurman? Was that all fake and just to hype up Gervonta? Do you think that was realistic because of the time off for Thurman?
Yeah, I mean, I don't. I don't really think that Gervonta Davis is fighting Keith Thurman. At a certain point, Gervonta Davis is just taking on too big of a. Thurman's not that tall.
He's sparring
he's about
Porter,
5'8"
Keith.
or so.
He's in Vegas right now sparring Porter.
No, I'm not saying he can't. But there's a big difference between sparring some bigger guys and actually fighting them. Now, Ness, I'll say this. I don't think Gervonta Davis has been given enough credit for beating Mario Barrios. That was not an easy fight. And Barrios, while he's not an A-level talent, he's a B-level talent, but he's a big dude, and he had never been beaten before. And you know as well as I do, Ness, now you're a big guy, so you're bigger than most people. But when you see Gervonta Davis in person, he's a little dude, man. I mean, I'm not tall, and he's much shorter than me. So for him to be fighting guys that are 5'10" and even be talking about fighting welterweights, that's impressive in itself. I don't know that the Thurman thing was realistic. Leonard's a promoter too. I mean, he's got sometimes they try to sell us narratives that aren't necessarily true. And it's all part of the show. We get all that. But I don't think that Gervonta Davis should be fighting at welterweight. What I want to see, and they have the financial wherewithal to make some of these fights happen, if the fighters can be a little more realistic with their financial demands. But I want to see Gervonta Davis fight the lightweights. We're in I wouldn't say a golden era, that's a little melodramatic, but these lightweights are very good. And now we have Devin Haney fighting Jojo Diaz. I give him credit for that. Jojo Diaz is better, I think, than people give him credit for being. But there's, Ryan Garcia, Teofimo Lopez, Gervonta Davis, all these guys, obviously Devin Haney. These guys should be fighting each other. So I don't want to continue hearing about them taking on these fantasy fights 3 weight classes above where they belong or whatever. I want to see them fight each other. And I know that, that's what the fans want, and sometimes it's just not realistic from a business standpoint. But why can't any of these guys fight each other? I don't get it. And I hope in 2022, at least one of those fights happens. Because what are we doing here? If you have all these young elite lightweights and none of them fight each other? Like if Devin Haney comes out on the right side of this Jojo Diaz fight, let's have him fight Tank at some point in 2022. Or have one of these guys. I think Teofimo Lopez is the best of the bunch, but I want to see him fight these other, before he moves up to junior welterweight, I want to see him fight these other lightweights, or at least one of them. So let's make one of those fights happen. And I don't know that we're on the path toward that happening yet, because inside and out too. Who knows what we're looking at in 2022? But I expect Gervonta Davis to beat Isak Cruz on December 5th, and I hope we get him into the ring with one of the at some point next year.
Keith, I don't want to keep you much longer. Do you have time? Because I could talk all day with you. Yeah.
I got a couple more minutes. I got to get back to work a little bit, but yeah, I got a couple more.
Okay. So I guess we should talk about. You said you want to see these guys fight each other at 135, but there's quite a few divisions that seem to be like that, right? Welterweight is one of those divisions, and you got 154, I would say. No, not 54, excuse me. Oh, my God. Oh, 60 with Andre.
I guess you got 68.
Yeah. No, I'm thinking 60. You got Andre, Laura, Jamal. Obviously, you can mix Canelo in there, but he's obviously done enough not to be mentioned. But they've never fought each other, and they've been with each other for 2 divisions now, 54 and 60. Have you heard anything about Laura? I know Laura wanted the Murata shot and was expecting the WBA to mandate. They didn't. They went with the Gennady fight. So anything about Laura?
Fighting who do you mean?
Anyone? Is there anything?
Oh, I think Lara is going to go back down to 154. He's not really a 60-pounder. He's not that big of a guy, and I think he just went up for whatever reason. Well, we know the reason. It was because the WBA pulls all kinds of nonsense with these titles, which they've now been forced to stop doing to some extent. But they kind of, they created that situation where he fought Thomas LaManna for a version of the WBA middleweight title. I think he's going to return to 154 pounds, which is a better weight class for him. As it relates to Andrade, I think Andrade's just in this same holding pattern that he's been in for quite some time, and he's going on 34 years old, unfortunately. So I expect him to beat Jason Quigley rather handily on Friday night. But I don't know what's ahead for him in 2022, because I don't see the Charlo fight being made. I think Charlo's made it crystal clear that under no circumstances will he fight him on Dazn, no matter how much money they pay him. I don't know necessarily if he'll use that fight as Charlo as worthwhile in terms of the.
You're muffling up a little bit again. I don't know if it's the mic. And can you just be clear when it comes to the Charlo Andrade fight? So you're saying Charlo's made it clear. So is this a Charlo thing, or because I thought maybe
I don't think that he. I'm sorry, I don't think that he's unwilling to fight, and I don't think it's like that he's afraid to fight. He's not afraid to fight anybody. But I think he's in position now where he has a real ticket in this Canelo sweepstakes. So if I'm Jamal Charlo, I just wait out until January when Canelo Alvarez said he would reconvene with his team and determine his next move. If his next move is someone other than Jamal Charlo, well, then Charlo can go about his business from there and decide what to do next. But he has to wait until, Canelo holds all the cards, right? He holds all the leverage.
Why do you think he has a good opportunity at a Canelo shot now? Can you just give us your breakdown?
Well,
why you think he's in the front runner?
I wouldn't say he's the front runner. I would say among the PBC fighters, I consider him the front runner because I think that Canelo looks at Benavidez as maybe a tougher fight than Charlo because Charlo would be coming up to 168, has never fought in that weight class. And I'm not saying that Benavidez would beat Canelo, but he's a young, strong, big volume puncher who's shown a great chin. There are a lot of things about David Benavidez that I think might make Canelo fight someone else before he seriously considers fighting Benavidez. Again, not saying that Canelo's afraid to fight anyone. He's fought everyone you could think of, basically, almost to this point. So it's not that. But I think from a business standpoint, the Charlo fight might be a bigger fight commercially right now than the Benavidez fight. The Benavidez fight might be a little more intriguing from a stylistic standpoint, but I do think that Charlo is still a bigger name right now than Benavidez, and people have wanted to see that fight for quite some time when they were both at middleweight. They're exactly the same age. They're both 31 years old. So I think now would be the time to make that fight if he stays with PBC. He seems to have been very happy with his PBC Showtime experience. He made a lot of money. I mean, people are speculating that he'll walk away from this somewhere between $45 and $50 million, and what's not to be happy about that, I guess. But on the flip side of it, on the Dazn side, he could still make the Triple G fight, assuming Triple G beats Murata in December. They could still make that fight, and that would be a huge event, and it would be a transcendent fight that would capture the mainstream's attention, unlike maybe any other fight that's available to Canelo, including the Charlo fight. So that I think he'll pick between those two fights and the Dmitry Bivol fight. And then I think I don't know if the Bivol fight he would consider easier than the Triple G fight, but I think he considers Triple G a diminished fighter at this point, and he's going on 40 years old. But I also think, Ness, that I think Canelo enjoys watching Triple G struggle to make big fights without him. He really has I don't know if he hates him, but he seriously dislikes Triple G, and I think he's kind of reveling in Triple G kind of struggling here, fighting once a year against Camille Zarameta, and then while the Murata fight is a big fight in Japan, it is not a big fight in the United States. And I think maybe he doesn't want to give him the opportunity to avenge his only loss and the opportunity to make more money against Canelo than he would make for fighting anyone else.
And that sounds like a very expensive fight to make. Do you envision or foresee that that's when DAZN brings back their rumored pay-per-view model that they've been surveying their customers with?
Yes, absolutely. I think for all intents and purposes, I think it's why that's been mentioned publicly, because if he fights Triple G, it will be on some sort of pay-per-view model. And then if you're a subscriber of DAZN, you have every right to scream bloody murder, basically, because they promised you that pay-per-view was dead and the pay-per-view model was dead, and now they're talking about doing pay-per-view fights. I'm not really sure how they do that with a straight face, to be honest with you, but that's the reality of the boxing business at this point. So if they fight, I do think it will be under some pay-per-view model, maybe at a lower price than $80, because the other pay-per-views that they did with Canelo, remember, DAZN did make, as part of their business model for Canelo's 3 fights before he fought Plant, those fights were available on traditional, it was not really publicized all that much, but those fights were available on traditional pay-per-view platforms and at a slightly lower price. They were like $65 and $60 instead of $70 and $80. Not that much of a difference, but yeah, so I think that fight would be on pay-per-view. It's a very expensive fight, as you said, Ness. And if I'm Canelo, though, and I'm making $45 to $50 million to fight Caleb Plant, and then you would have to figure he would make something close to that for fighting Jamal Charlo, you don't need to fight Triple G to make an enormous amount of money. You're already doing that.
Mm-hmm. So, last but not least, have you spoken to Bozy Ennis or Cameron Duncan? And, you know, where are they with a partnership so that us fans can actually see Boots in with some good PBC fighters? And how realistic is a Rashidi Ellis fight? I spoke to his trainer who says that for the beginning of the year, he should be out of the Golden Boy contract. Have you heard if there's any interest of a Rashidi Ellis from the PBC Showtime side as a potential Boots dance partner?
I have not, and I don't want to see that because there's no point to that. I mean, Jaron Ennis is look. If Jaron Ennis fought Terrence Crawford tomorrow, I'm not sure that I would pick Terrence Crawford. So I don't need to see him fight Rashidi Ellis and people on. No offense, but I don't need to see that. And Showtime doesn't need to spend that kind of money, and no one needs to spend that kind of money to see that. We know what the result of that would be. What we need to see, and look, this is unfortunately the predicament that Jaron Ennis is in. Cameron Duncan is his promoter, as we well know. He thus far has resisted partnering with Al Heyman, and until he does that, until Al Heyman makes it worth his while financially to do that, and thus far, in Cameron Duncan's opinion, that has not happened. But until that happens, Boots Ennis simply is not going to get the welterweights that he wants unless he becomes the mandatory. He's not in position to be the mandatory in any of the four sanctioning organizations right now. If you look at where he's ranked, while the Delorme win was very impressive, it is not going to put him in a mandatory position for his next fight. So he's really no better off today than he was the day before he beat Delorme. It hasn't really changed. Look, people are very high on Jaron Ennis, but
let me, I guess, debate you a little bit on that, because can't they just simply put in a petition to Daryl Peoples? He's obviously the number 3. Like you said, he just fought Delorme.
Well, I see where you're going with this, but let me ask you a question. Who has more influence with the sanctioning organizations, PBC or Cameron Duncan?
Obviously, PBC.
Well, there's your answer.
But Earl hasn't had a mandatory since 2019 with Ocampos. I got emails.
Right, but Abdul Kakarov or whatever his name is the mandatory, right? And he hasn't fought him, so there's already a mandatory.
Yeah, so you petition for the eliminator with the guy who keeps refusing to fight Earl. He hasn't accepted an actual fight with Earl.
Well, when has it been presented to him?
I mean, I got an email in 2019 that said that he was supposed to be next after Ocampos. And we're going on 2 years?
Well, I mean, supposed to be next and supposed to be next and being offered the fight are two very different things.
But that's
and then remember, Errol went into a unification fight against Sean Porter, and then he got into a car accident where he couldn't fight for a very long time, and then he fought Danny Garcia. I mean, Abdul Kakarov has not gotten his title shot, so they're not going to make, if what you're driving at is that they're going to make Abdul Kakarov fight Jaron Ennis before he gets his title shot, they can do that, but I would believe that would get them sued.
By Abdul, you're saying?
But right.
Well, damn.
Look, I'm not advocating any of this. I want Jaron Ennis to be able to fight for one of these titles because he's 24 years old now, going on 25. He's not 20 or 21, and he should not. He has earned, in my opinion, Look, if Stanionis has quote unquote earned a title shot, which the WBA seems hell bent on getting him for whatever reason, then Jaron Ennis certainly has. And if Jaron Ennis fought Emantas Stanionis tomorrow, what do you think would happen?
Yeah, I think Ennis would win. We had Stanonius on here, and he wasn't opposed to accepting step-aside money when I brought up the Earl Spence tweet where, you know, when everything broke, the news about Stanonius getting the Ugas shot, Spence said something, I'm paraphrasing on Twitter, but he said something about, you know, paying. You know, money talks is something like he said. Mm-hmm. Money talks to make situations like this work out. Do you believe that, you know, Al will offer Stanonius step aside to allow that alleged
Yeah.
February Ugas fight?
I could see that happening. I could, and as long as Stanionis accepts it, I mean, the WBA would have to go along with it, and the WBA has gone along with everything else, so I can't really see why they wouldn't. But, and Stanionis is, please don't get me wrong, Stanionis is very good. I'm not trying to shit on him or anything. The guy can fight, and eventually should fight for a title. But what has he done to earn a title shot more than Jaron Ennis? I can't see anything that he's done that warrants that. So, I just hope that Ennis does not remain in this holding pattern throughout 2022, because at a certain point it's detrimental to his career. And how many B-level, no disrespect to Thomas Delorme, tough guy, has fought everyone. I like Delorme, he's a nice person and all, but he beats up Lipinets, he knocks out Delorme in the first round. We've already seen him fight B-level PBC welterweights. How many of those types of opponents are we supposed to watch him go through? And by the way, Jaron Ennis is making a lot of money. He has a multi-fight deal with Showtime. While he's not technically affiliated with PBC, he is affiliated with Showtime, which, by the way, pays all the money. And he's making a lot of money. So, how many times are they... Now, they want to be in the Jaron Ennis business for the foreseeable future, so they're going to continue paying him. But how many B-level opponents are fans going to get up to watch Jaron Ennis fight before they finally get a little disinterested because he's not fighting the elite welterweights? That's what needs to happen. He needs to fight an elite welterweight. It's not his fault. In some respects, Jaron Ennis might be too good for his own good. He's not unbeatable. No one's unbeatable.
But that's why I'm shocked. In the interim, you wouldn't like the Rashidi Ellis fight. Undefeated fighter, a style he hasn't seen, the speed. He's consistently in the gym with Canelo. He's good enough for Canelo to bring him and his brother in for sparring. I don't know. I think they could sell it better than Delorme, Van Heerden.
Are you Rashidi? So you're Rashidi Ellis's manager behind the scenes. What's going on here?
I wish I was anyone's manager behind the scenes. But honestly, isn't he a better fight than those three last Ennis opponents?
I don't know. I mean, who was he beating? I have nothing personally against Rashidi Ellis.
He did a good job.
That is not who I'm looking to see Jaron Ennis fight. I don't know how else to say it. That's not who I'm looking to see him fight. I want to see him fight top-level welterweights, and I realize that might not be realistic for his next fight. But for the sake of Ennis's growth and for his career and certainly his brand, he needs to fight top welterweights as soon as humanly possible. Because otherwise, he just becomes stagnant at a certain point. Now, he's a self-motivated guy, and he's clearly not overlooking guys and not, under training or anything. Look what he just did to Delorme, obviously. But at a certain point, you have to wonder if he's becoming stagnant or becoming complacent. Not again, I have no evidence that he would. But if you're fighting the same level of guys for a couple of years and seemingly don't have that, top welterweight willing to fight you for quite some time, I don't know how he doesn't get bored at a certain point, So I just want to see that he's an otherworldly talent. I think, you need to see him beat the top welterweight. So I don't want to get carried away and start, make him into Sugar Ray Leonard or whatever. But the kid, I think you would agree, Nash. You've been watching boxing a very long time. You're an expert in the sport. The kid seems to have ability that's maybe once in a decade or so. I mean, he's really strong. He's really fast. He's really smart.
But I read your article, and I think you said he's 2 years out, if that. So, what are we supposed to do in the meantime? He's got to fight somebody, and he's not going to get Porter. Ugas is busy. Crawford is obviously busy. Earl is trying to get busy with Ugas. I mean, Danny already said he won't fight him.
As I said before, it's going to take Al Heyman to pay what Cameron Duncan wants. That's the sense that I get, that it's going to take Al Heyman to pay. Now, I don't know what Cameron Duncan is asking for.
What's Al's incentive? That's what I'm saying. In the interim, what does Cameron and Ennis do? What is Al's incentive? What if he just doesn't care to give Ennis a shot this year?
No, I know that's what I'm saying. I mean, but doesn't in the long term, Al wants to be in business with Jaron Ennis. Who doesn't? So if you're willing to, my point is maybe that if you're willing to grossly overpay all of these other guys who fight for PBC, wouldn't you overpay for a guy who's better than all of them?
Wow, you're high on this guy. Wow, better than all of them.
I'm just saying.
First
Look,
you said if he fights Crawford today, you don't know who you picking, and now you say he's better than all of them.
And I know that that's a strong statement, and we need to see it. I get it. I'm not, I don't want to sit here, again. I'm not trying to build him into the best welterweight that's ever lived, but the kid is damn good. And we need to start seeing how good against top-level guys. Now, if you're on the other side of it, if I'm Terrence Crawford and I beat Sean Porter on Saturday night, he's heavily favored to win the fight, and I would expect Terrence Crawford to win in a difficult fight, but I would expect him to win. If I'm Terrence Crawford, now he's a free agent after this fight, but what incentive do I have to fight that guy?
None.
Unless you're paying me a truckload of money. Terrence Crawford's 34 years old. What incentive does he have to fight a 24-year-old beast who has no name recognition outside of our boxing world here?
What's your pay-per-view prediction for Crawford Porter?
I would look. I hope it. For the sake of the health of the business, I hope that it does at least 500,000 buys. I'm hopeful that it does between 500,000 and 600,000. They made the price $69.99 as opposed to $79.99. That might help a little, but I kind of look at it like if you're willing to spend $70, you're willing to spend 80.
Yeah.
And if you're not willing to spend 70, if you're not willing to spend 70 or 60, you're just going to steal it. So, and that's going to impact the buys, unfortunately.
Absolutely.
So, look, I hope it gets to 500,000 because Terrence Crawford, while not a transcendent star like Canelo Alvarez, does have a high profile. He's arguably, in my opinion, the pound for. I get that his resume is not as strong as Canelo's, but from an ability perspective and being a 3-weight world champion and everything, he's right there toward the top of the pound for pound list. And if that guy, who hasn't always been the easiest guy for us to deal with, or has hurt his own cause in some respects, but if that guy can't sell 500,000 pay-per-views against by far the best opponent that he's ever fought, I don't think it speaks well to where we're at in the business.
Nah, you're right. But let me ask you, if they do 500, would you assume that entices Espinoza to I mean, because allegedly he's a free agent after this, Crawford. So, would you pay Crawford to fight Ennis since you're in the Ennis business as Espinoza, or is that something you let Al Heyman do?
Well, it all comes down to money, like anything else, right? I mean, how much money would Terrence Crawford want to fight Jaron Ennis? He has already said that he thinks the Keith Thurman fight is a bigger fight than he's about to participate in Saturday night. So maybe he hopes that he can lure Thurman. And Thurman's not old. I mean, Thurman, I believe, he either just turned 33 or he's around 33. So he's younger than Crawford. So from a commercial standpoint, they look at that as a big fight. Those are the kinds of, I guess my short answer in this is that those are the types of fights that I would expect Terrence Crawford to pursue if he wins Saturday night than Jaron Ennis. And that's unfortunate for Jaron Ennis, but that's reality. I don't see any reason from a business perspective why Terrence Crawford is going to go fight Jaron Ennis. And I'm not saying Crawford couldn't beat Ennis. I mean, Crawford is absurdly good, but he's still high risk, low reward in the sense that he does not have name recognition outside of the boxing world. And what good would it do for Terrence Crawford to fight him unless you back up the Brinks truck?
All right, this is the final one. So it sounds like you're of the mindset of the promoters that a guy like Ennis, while a great talent, you can't just throw him on pay-per-view. The numbers and the people really don't know him. Like, good fights don't bring us in. Because I'm assuming if Crawford could do 500 with Porter, he can get on in the ring with Ennis and maybe generate more interest because it's a fresher, younger, dangerous fight. But promoters have us believe that fights are not ready, and that's why an Ennis and a Crawford can't be in the ring. But what is your, I guess, train of thought behind that?
Yeah, I mean, you certainly couldn't put Jaron Ennis in a pay-per-view fight in his next fight as the A side against someone, you know, obviously other than Crawford or Spence or someone like that, because he's not ready for that. You know, he's not a big enough name. You know, the pay-per-view model is very different than the premium cable model, or certainly the network television model. So you would need to build his brand a little bit more. But he's in a weird position, though, Ness, in the sense that he's ridiculously talented, but if you can't get people to fight you, you're almost like again, too good for your own good. It's a weird thing to say, but it really does seem to be the position that he's in. He's not afraid to take any of these fights.
I'm sorry,
but it's going to take someone giving him an opportunity.
I know I sound like I don't understand it. It's because I don't. Are you saying that Crawford and Boots won't do well? Boots still needs to be developed into.
No. What I'm saying is you couldn't put Ennis on pay-per-view with him as the A side against a B side opponent. And I know that's not what you asked me, but I'm just saying he's not ready for the pay-per-view model in that way. But he could be ready for the pay-per-view model as the B side. He is. If you were to make Crawford and Ennis in a fight, I think it would do very well on pay-per-view, even though Ennis does not have a lot of name recognition outside of boxing now. But I don't know that it's financially feasible to do that fight, because Terrence Crawford is going to want an enormous amount of money to take that risk. And I understand that from Crawford's standpoint, because he would be risking a lot to fight a guy that people don't really know.
All right. Well, Keith, man, I'm not going to keep you any longer. Thank you for your time. We do appreciate you. You know, we would ask you so many more, but we're going to save you for another one.
All right, that's my pleasure, man. I'll talk to you soon, okay?
Thank you.
If you enjoyed the video, feel free to hit the like, subscribe, and share. As always, if you want to support us to the next level, head over to the patreon.com/ThaBoxingVoice. We have tons of exclusive, from Border Wars, Entitled, betting shows. The list goes on and on and on. But in addition to that, if you guys have questions for fighters, trainers, and promoters, this is where you can submit them. We will run out, get these questions answered, and put it back on the show just for you guys. Appreciate it. Peace.